Welcome to Rewriting the Narrative, an original podcast series produced by the Council for Exceptional Children. I'm Ben Tillotson, 2026 president of CEC, and today we're excited to have my friend and colleague, Kelie Hess, with us. Kelie has worked with people with disabilities for 17 years and is part of Utah State University's Institute for Disability Research, Policy, and Practice. She served as the program manager for the Utah School to Work project, which was a statewide system change initiative, and that is where Kelie and I really worked together, as my school is one of the schools as part of the project. But this initiative focused on a cross-system collaboration between schools, vocational rehabilitation, families, Medicaid providers, to improve competitive integrated employment outcomes for transition-age youth with high support needs, or as some might say, extensive support needs. She is currently providing training on customized employment for special education and transition educators, as well as guided group discovery to individuals and families. Kelie is also a co-trainer for the customized employment course for employment providers and consults on other transition-focused projects. Kelie also has lived experience with disability and is passionate about educating others on the positive impact of community-integrated employment. So welcome, Kelie.
Thank you, Ben. I am so happy to be here and have this opportunity to talk with you today.
Great. My first question is, if you were to describe yourself, how we do alternate text for images for those who may have vision impairments or are blind, and since this is audio and not video, can you describe yourself to people?
Yeah, I am a 42-year-old woman. I have long brown hair. I'm wearing a pink sweater. I have a tracheostomy and I am attached to a ventilator. So if you were seeing me, you would notice that and see that. And you can hear a little bit in my speech as well. The ventilator supports my respiratory system. And I also use a wheelchair for my daily mobility.
Thank you, Kelie. And for those that are also listening, I am a 37-year-old male, short brown hair, in a blue polo. So, Kelie, tell us why community integrated employment is so important, because this month, October, is Disability Employment Awareness Month. So yeah, why is community integrated employment so important?
I'm a huge advocate for employment, especially for people with disabilities. I've seen what it has done, not only for my life as a person with a disability, but for other people that I've been able to support. I've seen what an impact employment that is meaningful to the individual can do for their life. Employment is a lot more than just earning a paycheck, making money, although there is a lot of value in that. Money helps us to create the life that we want to live, right? It allows us opportunities and experiences that we want to have in our life. But more than the money, employment brings connection. It provides opportunity for continued growth and development. And I think if all of us think about what employment has done within our own lives, we'll understand the value of what it can be. And I feel like every person needs that. I feel like every person needs the opportunity to gain all of the benefits that come from having a job in the community where they're able to interact with people and are living through the work that they do, through the contributions and the skills and the work and effort that they are bringing to a business or an organization.
Thank you so much. What's different about this community integrated employment or this competitive employment? How does that differ from just a regular job?
Community integrated employment is different because the individual is earning minimum wage or higher. And for people with disabilities, that hasn't always been prioritized, but I feel like every person, no matter their disability, deserves to be compensated fairly for their work, for their time, for the contributions that they're bringing to a business. But also, they have the right to have jobs that are in the community where they're able to engage and interact with people with and without disabilities. Historically, people with disabilities, there's been a trend to have them working in isolated settings where it's only people with disabilities that are working and only people with disabilities that even visit that work setting. And I don't think that is healthy. I don't think that really maximizes the employment opportunity and the values that I spoke of earlier of being able to build networks and connections and friendships, relationships with people, anyone in the community. And I feel like community integrated employment is also valuable because that kind of helps us evolve as a society to understand that disability is a normal part of the human experience. When we see people with disabilities working in the community, then disability becomes less unfamiliar to us. We feel more comfortable around disability, and it just becomes part of our broader human experience, and we look at disability as a normal part of society and the human experience.
Yeah. Do you think that some people are afraid to hire people with disabilities because it seems scary? Like they don't know how to make accommodations, modifications, or how they can even do the job?
Yeah, for sure. I think that if you haven't had experience, maybe you don't know anyone who has a disability, then that can be a little bit as an employer, maybe you're hesitant. Maybe you don't know what that's going to look like. Maybe you don't know what a person's abilities look like and you don't really have a vision of how their work is going to add to and be a benefit to your business. So, yeah, I do think that sometimes there's this idea of concern or fear or maybe even an unwillingness to hire people with disabilities until there's been experience and knowledge and understanding about disability and what that actually looks like. And as far as accommodations, I do think that employers, maybe they're just thinking, like, I don't want to deal with all of that. I don't know what that's going to look like. I don't want to have to make huge adjustments. But usually, accommodations are not huge adjustments, they are very small things that are done
Mm.
to change or adjust the job. And here's the truth of the matter, Ben. Everyone, with or without a disability, we all make adjustments within our work. We make changes that will help us to do our job better and help us to be at our best. We don't always label them as accommodations, but I guarantee that every person who has a job in small ways, we make changes, we make adjustments so that we can do our best work and make the work experience better for us. Does that
Yeah. So, like working from home, right? That's an accommodation. Adjusted alternate seating options, a standing desk, right? All of these are accommodations, but we don't call them accommodations necessarily.
help? We just say, hey, I think it would be awesome to have a desk that will allow me to stand throughout the day when I want to or need to. And I have all kinds of things in place, but they're not labeled as accommodations. I have apps on my phone that help me stay organized, things that I've asked for that will help me do my best work. But again, I haven't labeled them as an accommodation. I think we really like to label things. And when it comes to people with disabilities, I think we get really overexcited about applying labels where it's not always necessary. So accommodations might sound scary, but when you really look at what it is, what the need is, and what the adjustment or change is, likely it is not going to be anything significant or in any way hinder the business or how things are done.
And in some ways, it probably makes things better, right? What does the research show about the positive impact of hiring people with disabilities?
Oh, yeah, like, I think it definitely makes things better because when you make changes that help within your business, that help a person with a disability, it usually helps everyone. It helps all of the staff and all of the employees there. So, I think that, again, just those changes, when we initially, it might be something we wanna avoid, but I feel like the more we just embrace the idea of allowing adjustments or changes, AKA accommodations, then it does make work better for it typically makes work better for everyone.
Yeah, I can think of an individual who was hired at a restaurant, and this individual had autism. And so they put labels and pictures to really guide what was going on in the back of house, right? If anybody has worked in a restaurant, which I used to for a few years, the back of house can be chaotic. You're just trying to find places to store items, and not everything is always labeled. And by them going in and making sure that things were labeled for this individual, it actually benefited everybody. And then when there were new hires, it was much easier to train them and for them to know where things were because things were labeled. And so they actually, as a business, they just worked more efficiently in the back of house.
Yeah, for everyone, even people that don't identify as having a disability, those visual cues, when you're overloaded and you're like running at top speed, how can that not be a help and a benefit?
Yeah, definitely. I like what you said about people haven't had exposure or experiences with people with disabilities. They may not know how to make those accommodations or what is appropriate. And I know right now what I'm trying to work on at my job is to foster opportunities for students in different departments, whether that be in the sciences and architecture and fine arts, to gain experiences working with people with disabilities so that when they graduate and they go out into our communities and they interact with people with disabilities, it's no longer this unfamiliar situation because they've already been able to experience what it is like to interact with someone with a disability, how they might communicate, what supports they might need. And then they can be better advocates to their friends, colleagues, neighbors, other community members.
Yeah, I love that. I 100% agree that the more experiences that can be had, both for people with disabilities and people who do not have experience with disability, when we can blend experiences, pulling people together, that's a win for everyone.
If I can touch on like a personal note with you, that you had some experience when you were in school with a PE teacher and where teachers really did not know what to do and how to make any accommodations. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah. So I went to school in the 90s. It was a little bit back, and I do think that things are changing, but in my school experiences, it was different. I didn't have a lot of, or really any, formal support put in place during my school experience as far as adjustments or accommodations. So when things would come up, like PE class, then instead of making adjustments or finding an accommodation that was a better fit for me to engage in an appropriate PE experience, it just didn't happen. I'm a person that is much smaller than a typical adult woman. I'm very small for my age. And I was even smaller when I was in high school. So there was this fear of if I just mixed in with the games that were done during PE, that was going to be a problem. And I agree, that wouldn't have been appropriate. I didn't want to take those risks, and that was a very ill fit. But instead of, again, finding an accommodation or finding a way to adjust a PE experience for me, they just says, Kelie, you don't have to take PE. You just don't have to take it. Even though that is a requirement for all high school students. They just magically took that off of what I needed to graduate. And at the time, because I'm a teenager and I really didn't care about PE, I was like, okay, awesome. I will take more art classes. I loved art and I took all the art classes and I just kept retaking more art classes because every semester I had a free time because it was instead of taking PE, I just took more art classes. And
And
again,
this is why you're such a good painter.
thank you, but as a kid, I didn't see a problem with it, but as an adult, within the experiences I've had in my career, I've been able to see that wasn't really an appropriate solution. Alternatives that were a better fit for me should have been explored and offered. There should have been more conversation to see what can be done. But instead, it was just the experience was completely removed from me.
Yeah, so they didn't even ask you what your feelings or thoughts were, or you didn't even make an effort to include you. They just automatically assumed, based on how you look, that this is not going to be a good fit.
Yeah.
And so then they removed the opportunity for you to even participate to some level.
Yeah. And again, like I didn't care at the time, but as an adult, I'm thinking I probably really could have benefited from a modified P experience, but that was not an option given. It was just like a quick solution of, well, take more art classes.
I think about that often, that sometimes we can disable people more than their disability
Ab-
because we don't even give them the opportunity to make a choice, to fail, to learn from these experiences because we just remove all of that hardship. And so then they never learn. I remember in several instances working with students who, for one reason or another, were not challenged or given options. And then when we would ask them to make a choice, what is your preference? They didn't have a preference because they have never had to make that choice. So they didn't know what the options were for them. So we had to give them experiences so that they could develop a preference, and then they had a choice.
Yep. Then I've also seen that a lot in the work that I've been able to do, just where people don't have the skill to indicate what they want and not just indicate, but really even think through and decide what do they want because just for one reason or another, all of those opportunities to make choices for themselves had been done for them. And so that can be a steep learning curve for somebody who hasn't had the experience of making choices and making decisions for themselves. And so I've seen so often people will just wouldn't give it a choice. They say, I don't know, I don't care. And they're waiting for someone else to make that choice for them because that's what they have learned. And going back to your point about the chance to fail. I see that a lot, especially when we get close to like considering employment or even experiencing employment. I think that a lot of times people who are supporting people with disabilities, people with good intentions, we have this fear that we don't want to set them up for a difficult situation, a situation that maybe they won't be successful in. But that's not real life. All human beings, we need to have experiences that don't go well, that don't go the way we initially envision them to go. We need to have things go wrong. We need to have things not work out. We sometimes even need to experience failure. But again, I feel like people with good intentions often remove that experience, but it is a valued experience and almost a privilege to have the opportunity to try something out and not have it work out. And we're not doing people with disabilities any service by removing that from their lives. It's one of the greatest skills we have as people to learn how to adjust when things don't play out the way we initially thought that they would, and to shift and be able to adapt and try again. And I feel like it's important to keep that in mind. Even for myself, I feel like a lot of times I'm like, oh, I'm evolved, but I'm not as evolved as I think. Because I see that with a family member that has some disabilities that I support, and I never want to see things go badly. So I try to map out everything just right so they're going to have a successful experience. But I've had to really remind myself that is not helpful to them because they have the capacity to learn through mistakes. And so if I remove that experience, I am not helping them.
Yeah, you know what? This reminds me of an experience I had when I taught elementary. There was a student who there was a bullying incident at school, and he had autism, he experienced echolalia, and he really didn't initiate a lot of conversations. And when I brought it up with his mom, her initial thought was, which is normal, this is scary. What do we do? And how do we prevent this? And I said, yes, like we don't want bullying, but how do we utilize this as an opportunity to then help him develop the skills for advocacy? And it re-shifted her focus with her son of how does she support him rather than her just taking care of the issue on her own, and then him never being able to develop his own voice. And what was great is we worked with the mainstream teacher that informed me about the situation, and he would speak with the students. And over this course, those who first started to bully him eventually became his friends because they were taught and educated about his disability, how he interacts, communicates with the world. And I remember there was this incident in the lunchroom that the teacher witnessed where marbles became very popular again. I remember they were popular as a kid, but all of a sudden they became popular again. And they were going around saying what colors they liked for the marbles in the lunchroom. And normally they have to ask him and they would give him choices without anybody asking him or prompting him. He just spontaneously told them what colors he liked. And the boys just like the uproar in the lunchroom. They thought something terrible had happened. They were chanting his name. They were like so proud of him. So we took this negative opportunity and we changed the focus so that it could be a learning opportunity. So with that and what you just talked about, how do you think that schools can better involve students in setting their own post-secondary and career goals?
I think developing that skill of choosing your preferences and not just preferences, but decisions for yourself, if they're not given that experience early on, then it's going to get harder when we ask them to be an active participant in their goals or their IEP or things of that nature. So I really think experiences, conversation, and developing that skill, it's the skill of growing autonomy for your own life. And I feel we don't always think of that as a skill to learn and be developed. We just hope that it's going to kick in naturally one day. But I think it actually is a skill that requires some intentionality and some effort, some targeted effort to really kind of develop. And so I think giving options is also a way to start to build that belief that a person can choose for themselves. But young people across the board, disability or not, don't always know what their choices and preferences are. So they do need guidance sometimes and options for what are my choices for, but then leaving space for them to explore those choices and not just in the moment, not just through one conversation, but showing some examples and experiences what each of those choices actually mean. I feel like sometimes we keep things very verbal because that's what we do as human beings. We talk and we have conversations, but sometimes that's not a good fit for every person. And we need to really explore options and choices. We need to have them shown to us in a different way besides just through words. And so to really be able to make an informed choice for themselves, they need to be given the opportunity to see an example of what that choice is going to look like. Does that make sense?
100%. And a lot of your work focuses on individuals who have more high support needs, extensive support needs. And how do these partnerships with our community organizations, businesses, and families, how does that expand opportunities for these students with disabilities who typically or historically have not been given employment opportunities?
Yeah. Experiences and opportunities with community partners is so valuable. It doesn't mean that a partner needs to promise or commit a job, but even just the chance to have a student come in and try a task, to gain a new experience, to be in a setting that maybe is new for them. There is so much value in that. And again, I think it's a win on both sides because it's a chance for students to gain more experience, which I think the more experience and exposure to the world and the community that the individual lives in, the more that can happen before a person exits school, the more successful they will be once they've left school and exited school. And it's also a win for the community partners, again, just to have the chance to have the contributions that the student brings. And when I say contributions, let me explain that a little bit.
Yeah, please do.
Contribution could be it could be a skill that the student is good at. It could be a task that they enjoy doing, or it could be something entirely different. It could be a personality attribute that is of value and a benefit to that work setting. It could be an untangible skill of remembering dates and details and remembering everyone's name who comes into that business. That's just a random example, but every person with a disability has contributions, but we don't always know them right off the bat. Sometimes we have to dig in and really spend time with the person to be able to identify and pull out what those contributions are. But everyone has them. Every person, no matter what kind of support or what level of support is needed to help them be successful, every person has something of value to contribute to a setting, a workplace, and a business. And finding that right fit and match can be a process, but when it happens, it is such an amazing win for both, not just the individual with a disability who's seeking an experience and a job, but it's such a win for the employer and the business overall.
What you're describing, this is everybody. Like, I know of people who, yeah, they may not have the technical skills for the job, but their personality and what they bring to the culture and the climate of the workspace is so valued and so needed, right?
Yeah.
And I think it is, how do we get to know the individuals and give them the opportunities where they can show us what their skills and abilities are? And that's just the purpose of this customized employment, right? Is you find the jobs where they're really going to shine and succeed. But it doesn't start when they get at high school, like you were
Right.
talking about. They have to be able to, it's giving them options and choices when they're in preschool
Yes.
and throughout the years, so that by time they get to that age of graduating, exiting high school, they already know how to make choices.
And to really highlight throughout the years what a person's strengths and contributions are, so that when they leave school, not only do they know what their own strengths and contributions are, but they have confidence because of those
Mm.
strengths and contributions. And I feel like that is huge. And you're right, Ben. It can't all, it doesn't always come together in those last few years of school. It needs to start at the very beginning when a person is very young, but all of it builds together, but identifying and highlighting those strengths and contributions can make a significant impact on who that person becomes as they grow, as they develop, as they gain confidence, because they've been able to recognize and be shown what their strengths and contributions are.
Yeah, I really like that. And on this topic of jobs that individuals with higher support needs would get, what are some examples? Can you give us some idea of what those jobs might be? Because I think a lot of people who don't work in special education with people with disabilities, they might typically think, oh, yeah, there's someone with a disability who bags groceries at my grocery store, or they're a greeter at this place. These are like our stereotypical disability jobs. But what are some other jobs that people don't always think about that you've seen students get?
That's a great question because you're right, Ben. We tend to default to the jobs that we've seen other people with disabilities do: janitorial, bagging groceries, being a greeter, those things. Not that those are bad jobs, but those are not the only jobs that exist for people with disabilities. There is so much more. And through the model of customized employment, that process really looks at who the person is, what their strengths are, what type of environment they do their best at each job. When you really explore that, each job is going to look as unique and as individual as the person themselves. I've known an individual that worked at an exotic pet store. He it what They didn't just give him the dirty jobs because nobody wanted them. That was the right fit for him. He loved handling like the crickets and grubs and gross little creepy crawlies that were fed to the larger animals. That's that was his thing. That's like through customized employment, that's what we learned. That's what we identified to be a good fit. And he loved it. He thrived there. Another individual who just really loves chickens. He had his own flock of chickens and he became a chicken expert at different farmers markets and venues where other backyard chicken birds, I don't know the terminology there,
I don't know either.
could consult with him and ask them and get advice and expertise on caring for their chickens. I have known an individual that got a job at his local fire station, and everyone wondered, how is this going to go? What is this going to look like? How can he contribute to this environment and this setting? And he does. They love him there. He has his tasks that he does, and he doesn't work every day, but the days that he works, that's a good day at the firehouse. And it's not because I want to make a point. Like, I think that, again, sometimes we think that, well, hiring somebody with a disability, that's a kindness, that's a charity. That's not what is going to work and be long-term sustainable for employment. But to really, again, identify the contributions that a person brings to a business and matching them with the needs of a business, that's when we have success. And that's when it's a win for all parties. And we're not asking for a favor, we're asking for an opportunity. We're asking for an opportunity that is going to bring true value to that workplace as well, not just be a benefit for the individual with a disability.
Yeah, no, I really love that. And I remember, do you remember the time when I had a student in the transition program who was a wheelchair user? And when you came out with us into the community and we rode public transportation together and then we went to the job site, he was so excited to just see somebody else with a wheelchair who was an adult who talked to him like a normal person because his speech, it was a progressive illness that he had, and he kind of lost some of his speech intelligibility. And he would comment about how people would speak to him like a child.
Yeah.
And so it was so meaningful to him to see you and to see what was possible.
Yeah. No, I do remember that. That was a great day. I'm a firm believer in people with disability, whatever their disability is, whether it's a physical disability or a developmental disability, being around other people that they can view as a peer, but maybe isn't a different phase of life than them, to help them to gain a vision of what their life can be. I think there's so much value in that. I think about that even for myself. Like growing up in the community, I didn't have a lot of exposure, very little exposure to disability. I had my disability, and that's what I knew, but I didn't have others that I knew that I felt like I had things in common with, that I felt were living well with a disability and was something that I felt I wanted to model. That didn't happen until college. But then when it did happen in college, that was very powerful for me to see other people that were living with a disability, even if it wasn't exactly the same type of disability as me. It just really expanded my ideas, my beliefs, my perception of disability. Even though I've lived with my disability since birth, I thought that I knew all about the world of disability. I did not. I absolutely did not. But just that experience of interacting and engaging with others that have things in common with you in regards to disability can be very powerful. So when I think about students with disabilities and think about how helping them grow this idea, this belief for themselves that they can have a job that is meaningful to them, not just a job bagging groceries. Again, that's not a bad job if that's what you want to do, but that's not the only job that exists. There's endless possibilities for people with disabilities in employment, but we don't always see that. We don't always know that right away. It's a process to get there and to grow that vision. But I think in growing that vision, there can be a lot of value in, again, engagement with other people that have disabilities that are already doing work, doing non-traditional disability employment.
Yeah, I really love that. It just hits home a belief of mine that as a teacher, it's not always about the content I teach. I think what's more important is how am I giving them the skills so that they then, when they go into the world, they know how to find the resources to solve their real world problems, right? Whether that be through literacy, through math, through science, even in how they engage with others in their relationships. It's just helping them to develop those skills because I can't be with them in every situation, but they are going to be with themselves. Like you are the only person that is with you for your entire life.
Yeah.
And so my role as a teacher is to help you to better understand and know yourself. And then how do you advocate for yourself with other people to get your needs met, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I've seen you in action, and I think you are phenomenal at helping people develop those skills. And I agree with you. Like a person with a disability, and I'm including myself in this, we need to be our own best support. There's other people in our lives that will give us support, but what we develop for ourselves, that's going to be our very best support.
Mic drop. We'll just end it right there, Kelie. That was beautiful. That was great. But one more question. We always end this podcast with who is a teacher who or someone in your educational experience that really stands out to you that had a positive impact in your life?
Yeah, I've had a lot of them. This is going back full circle because I mentioned how I didn't participate in PE, but I did do a lot of art classes. And I had an amazing art teacher in high school, and she really saw something in me. She didn't dismiss or ignore my disability, but she didn't make that like the primary attribute about me as an emerging artist, as an art student. And she encouraged me in ways that teachers really hadn't before. And students feel right away when an educator has a sincere belief in them and has an expectation for them. I knew exactly the educators that didn't have an expectation for me and those that did. And this art teacher, again, she just really encouraged me and even nudged me in directions that I don't know that I would have had the confidence to go on my own. I'm talking about Sterling Scholar programs where I could develop a portfolio of my art and compete with other students across the state. And that was such a good experience for me because it helped me develop confidence and this belief in myself that I can do things. I can do things even if I haven't figured it all out yet, I can get there. And she knew that. She recognized that in me before I could recognize it in myself. And that was just incredibly powerful for me.
Thank you so much, Kelie. It has been
Man.
a pleasure to have you here today. And thanks to everyone for listening today to Rewriting the Narrative. Join us each month as we continue our conversation with key voices in the world of special education. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And for more information on the Council for Exceptional Children, visit us online at exceptionalchildren.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.